G'day everyone. This Tuesday, the 11th of November, Armistice Day, and John, it's been a big day for Club Grubbery. We've done a few interviews today.
It has been a big day, but we're finishing on an extra high note with our next guest for sure.
Absolutely. Gerard Rennick, great to have you on, mate.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. It's good to be here.
Yes, it's been a day of domestic politics today. We interviewed John Ruddick and Gigi Foster on a panel this morning. We spoke with George Christensen about digital ID matters. That was pretty enlightening and what he's doing. And now you, mate. Last week it was all Canada and the USA with Aaron Siri, which was an
Yeah,
excellent interview. Excellent interview.
yeah. I've spoken with Aaron, and I've actually got a clip I'm going to use of his when I forget if it was the Senate or Congress he was speaking to, but he just really nailed the whole. Every other corporation has liability for their products except Big Pharma.
Yeah,
And I'm pleased to say that's one of our key policies at People First is to make Big Pharma, like every other, commercial company, have to take responsibility and the liability for the products they deliver, especially these products because they're going into people's arms. It's not like you might get a dodgy loaf of bread or something that, you can just throw out. This stuff, you get it wrong, can impact you for life. So, yeah.
exactly. So, look, we're really interested to talk about People First, but just for those who don't know you, and I don't know anyone who wouldn't, you're a Queensland LMP senator in the federal Senate from
Yeah.
2019 to 2025.
Yeah.
You were one of the victims of dodgy pre-selection that the Liberal Party seemed to be renowned for, and the factions and all that sort of stuff. And we're sick to death of their carry on. And as a result of that, you formed People First. You weren't able to succeed in gaining your seat in the last election, but boy, oh boy, from what you're hearing, you're gearing up, and the party is gearing up for some big stuff in the next couple of years. So we want to unpack all that with you. We want to find out where you've been going on your tour, what kind of reaction you're getting, and also we want to talk to you about some policies that are sort of impacting a lot of our thinking through the day these days. So great to
Yeah.
have you on, mate. Johnny, you want to start with the questions?
Yeah, well, why don't you kick us off, Jared, and tell us about your tour? I know you got to a lot of regional centres and some metropolitan ones, but yeah, give us an overview of how that eventuated and what you encountered on the tour.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I'll just thanks for that introduction there, Graham. I don't feel like I'm a victim, by the way. I'm sort of glad to be out of the LNP, to be honest, and not because I wanted to see it fail, but it's actually some people still have a dig at me saying, why am I sort of trying to tear down conservative politics? And that's not what I'm trying to do at all. I'm actually trying to speed up the renewal process. Because this is actually what I spoke a lot about when I was on the tour, John, in the stump speech, was the need to have an active grassroots movement again in conservative politics. I don't like using that word conservative, but I'll use it tonight, because ultimately you can't. We're falling into the trap of talking amongst ourselves inside the bubble, whether that's on social media or in the LNP's case, they do it inside branch meetings where they'll have branch meetings, but they don't really get out and engage with the community. And that's what, when we started branches of People First, well, when I, pushed to start branches of People First, that's what I wanted to do, was actually to give members a say, because it's incredibly important in politics that people can hold politicians to account. Now, up until very recently, the last two elections, it's probably fair to say that the Conservatives coalition would have 60 safe seats and the Labor Party would have 60 safe seats. And that meant that out of the 150 lower house seats in Parliament, and it's probably fair to say they had 3 safe seats from each state in each for each major party. So what that meant was that in the lower house, it meant that 60 plus 60 is 120 over 150 lower house seats. 80% of the seats, or the people that would represent those seats, weren't actually really picked on election day. They were picked in the pre-selection process. And what we saw in 2022, in 2021, October 2021, Morrison signed up to net zero. Now, that was a backflip on his promise in the 2019 election, where he said that he wasn't going to sign up to net zero. Now, in New South Wales, a bloke by the name of Matt Camazzuli tried to take the New South Wales Liberal Party to court because the New South Wales Liberal Party wouldn't have pre-selections for Alex Hawke and Susan Ley. They basically shoehorned their sitting members back into their roles as as being the Liberal Party candidates for Farah and Mitchell. Now the problem with that was that the New South Wales base was angry, and this is similar in other states. It wasn't just New South Wales, because politicians had lied to their own base or backflipped. It might be a more accurate term on one of their core key promises was that they weren't going to sign up to net zero. So, you can my pre-selection was stitched up. I don't care what anyone says. But the point is that the pre-selection process inside political parties has broken down. Now we don't expect Labor to change their ways. They've always been top command and control from the top. But on the right side of politics, conservative politics, one of the key values of the LNP is the dignity and worth of every individual. People want to say in how their parties run. And that's basically, that process is broken down. I mean, I've got a lot of members in the People First up here who've left the Liberal Party because they were jilted in pre-selections and they were basically vetted out and weren't allowed to actually run and put their, stand in front of their SEC and ask to be pre-selected. It was basically head office said, no, you can't run, we want this person. So this is where, in my view, the political process is breaking down, step one. So there needs to be greater accountability and transparency inside of political parties. And then the next step where it's breaking down is the political parties, if you don't have an active grassroots membership, they need to be the ones getting out and engaging with the community, because ultimately social media, will get you so far. But it is very combative, and you do tend to it tends to polarize people. Whereas if you go out to the markets or you go, out to the shows and the show stalls, it's much more collaborative. And, when you're talking to someone face to face, you treat them with a lot more respect. So that's the reason why I've set up People First. Obviously, I needed to set up a party to get my name above the line at the last federal election. But the reason why, I'm keeping it going is that we want to lift the corporate governance, the transparency and accountability inside political parties themselves, because if they don't improve their act and lift their corporate governance, then you won't see, you won't see the behaviour improve in Canberra either.
So true.
So that's what I was speaking about, and that's why I went around, set up branches. So we went to, first night was in Ballina. So we had 16 nights on the road. Basically went to Ballina, Newcastle, 2 nights in Sydney, a night in Wollongong, Canberra, Wagga. Then went into Melbourne. So the first night was in Melbourne. Sorry, went into Victoria. The first night was in Melbourne. Next day was Tregalgan and Geelong. So I did 2 stops on the Sunday. Following night was Shepparton, then Bendigo, then Warrnambool. Then I drove across to South Australia, where I did my last night proper meet and greet in Adelaide. And then on the way back, I stopped off in Orange and Tamworth for just a quick meet and greet with a couple of, some people there as well. So, look, we had about 1,200 people attend all up. Lots of people have signed up. We'll continue just to keep signing up people. We've got a long game here. We believe we do have the best policies of anyone. And it's interesting now, a lot of people are using the word solutions. We were pushing solutions this time last year. I know that we do have an influence on politics. But more than just having solutions, we've got the knowledge, and we desperately need to reform our economy. And in the stump speeches that I give, I talk about the things that happened in the 80s, like the Button plan, whereby tariffs were removed and we let manufacturing go offshore. I talk about how Keating lifted capital controls. I talk about how Dawkins implemented the Dawkins plan that funded everyone to go to university. I talk about the introduction of compulsory superannuation and how that's destroyed young people. Anyone on a median salary of $80,000, for example, you'll pay just under 20 grand tax. You need 50 grand to live on. That last $10,000 that you could save on 80,000 Well, guess what? 12% of 80,000 is 9,600. So it might be 12% of your total income, but if you're on a median wage of around 80,000, it's literally 100% of what you can save is being sent off to some bloke or someone in an ivory palace in Sydney or Melbourne, and you have no control over that because you can't elect your board members. Or next to no control over it, and there's no guarantee you're going to get it back when you're 67. So, we want to empower the individual and the families by basically, letting people keep their superannuation so they can save for a house faster, paying childcare to the parents, so parents can have greater choice over the type of childcare they give. There's millions of shift workers in this country that can't drop their children off, at 6 o'clock at night when they're, doing the night shift, whether you're police or nurse or, working in hospitality or a truck driver. So, there's some of our policies. And then, of course, there's the taxation and monetary changes that we want to, make as well.
Gerard, you're eminently qualified in finance and economics. You can make a very substantial income in the private sector, and yet you're choosing to do what you're doing now. I know you're sacrificing a lot of income potential by setting up the party. Why are you doing it?
Well, I want to see our policies get introduced. So I ran for politics because I want to make sure our children get the same opportunities as our forefathers gave to us. I want to stand up for Australians who stand up for themselves. And I want the government to serve the people, not control the people. And the best way the government serves the people by building infrastructure. That infrastructure generates recurring revenue, and that revenue then pays for your schools and hospitals. It's a very simple, business model government should be operating on. So that's why, and that I didn't really get anywhere in the 6 years I was a senator. I mean, and unfortunately, we got way late on COVID for about 3 years at least, if not 4 years out of the whole 6 years was wasted on on that whole COVID debacle. So, and the other reason why I'm staying in it, apart from, I believe that we do have the knowledge in regards to monetary policy and taxation policy, is that I touched on earlier. I want to improve corporate governance inside the political party system. The minor parties are a rabble. They've been a rabble for too long. I do think we need to merge, but I think we need to merge into a new entity where there's no sort of skeletons buried. And we need a fresh start, and that also means that there needs to be renewal in the coalition. I think if we look at the last federal election, there's 2 seats that I think are waving danger signs for the Liberal Party. One was in Kooyong, whereby the Liberals couldn't win that seat back from Monique Ryan. They had a really good candidate there, Amelia Harmer, a young, I think she was young, 30-something-year-old female, eminently qualified, and she couldn't beat, perfect candidate to take on a Teal, and she couldn't beat, Monique Ryan, who had a pretty bad campaign given her husband was caught stealing corflutes, couldn't win the seat back off Monique Ryan. And again, in Sydney, we had Giselle Capitarian, if I've pronounced the name correctly, in the seat of Bradfield. That was held by a former minister, Paul Fletcher, another blue ribbon Liberal seat, another perfect candidate, and they couldn't beat the Teal in that seat either. So, the Liberals are facing a bit of a existential crisis here, and something's got to give here, whether it's the Nats leave the Liberals and the minor parties roll into the Nats. Yet again, I'd qualify that by saying that needs to be led by Matt Canavan, not David Littleproud. And then the Liberals, either Angus Taylor, who, Angus has been a bit of a disappointment, to be quite frank, or Andrew Hastie takes over the Liberals. But yet again, Andrew's on the backbench now. So the longer he stays on the backbench, the more the Liberal Party's going to bleed. So, and whether or not they've got any members remaining at the next federal election, who knows? So, because obviously, as you probably know, One Nation have now started branches once we did. They're pulling in, I suspect, a lot more than we are, and that's going to be hurting the coalition a lot. So, we need to, rather than see it as sort of tearing the party down, I think that was done in the last decade or two, whereby the incumbent coalition MPs walked away from their values and didn't have the guts to stand up against some of the COVID narratives, the climate change narrative, the war on terror narrative. They've gone down too many, what's the word, wrong paths, for want of a better expression, and their base has lost a lot of trust in them. So that's why I'm going. I want to obviously see good policy and reform government, and I want to reform, the political system as well.
Yeah, notable aspirations for sure, John.
So, Gerard, I suppose on that, I'm moving forward on that. I mean, if it becomes obvious that you can't do that in your own right, um, given the political dynamics of people branching off everywhere, is what hope do you have of of a merger between like-minded smaller parties? Obviously there's been some work done with it. I know there was a meeting not long back in Sydney that the Hart Party were involved with, but do you see that as a viable option?
Oh, well, I do see it as a viable option. I don't just only see it as a viable option. I see it as, the only option. We do have to merge, and I can't keep doing this, the work. I mean, this what I'm doing as president of this party, and we do have over 3,000 members now. It's harder than being a senator, so I can't keep doing this by myself, and it's silly for every party to have its own set of volunteers doing the same stuff. I mean, we need to consolidate our back end resources so we can focus more on the front end, pitching out tents at markets and things like that. So it needs to happen. We're still talking. I'm still talking to two parties. So and then we're still in an alliance with Catters, I should add as well. And we get on very well with the Catters. So if we can merge with one or two other parties, we'll be a little bit bigger. I mean, we're still small parties. And that's where we're at. I mean, the other elephant in the room, of course, is what Clive does. So if Clive was to stay out of it at the next election, and I'm not saying he will, that would, help consolidate the vote amongst fewer parties as well. And, I won't even bother predicting what Clive will do. And then there's One Nation as well, who's obviously, doing very well in polls at the moment, but in my view, lacks the corporate governance to actually run a party. Now, they can improve, like One Nation, as they get all this attention, will probably get more money and do have the potential to improve their systems. But they've got to do that. And I won't go near One Nation with all the skeletons in the closet they've got at the moment. So, there needs to be an entirely transparent executive. There's no, we don't know. I don't know who is on the One Nation executive. And there needs to be a proper pre-selection process. So you can't have, for example, the New South Wales members of One Nation should have been given a choice or a vote as to who represented them in the Senate when Warwick Stacey stood down. It shouldn't have been a captain's call from Pauline, because that's what Labor does, right? And if you want a proper grassroots movement, then people, you have to have a proper pre-selection process as well. But that may change over time. But, yet again, I personally think there needs to be just a whole new party. Everyone joins it. We have a proper president, a proper federal executive, state executives in every state. They're transparent. We know who they are. And there's a proper democratic process in you get to vote on who your executives are. So every branch has to have an AGM every year. You have your democratic process on what your policies are. So you have state conferences every year where you get to vote on policy. And then you have a democratic process on your pre-selection process as well, where you open up nominations, and we'll be doing this in 2027 for the next federal election. You open up nominations to your membership. People are entitled to apply to run as a candidate to the party. And then over a period of, a few weekends, we'll go and actually have proper pre-selections where all the members can come into a room, and you'll hear the candidates pitch, make their pitch, or potential candidates make their pitch. And that's the process. I mean, it's what the Liberal Party used to do, but they've basically been hijacked by careerists now. And we can see this with the debacle over net zero. Like the Wets are just hanging on and now threatening to leave the party if they don't get their way. And of course, that's just absurd.
George Christensen, in a Nostradamus moment today with us, said that he predicts Barnaby Joyce will be the leader of One Nation and go into the Senate at the next election. What would you think about that?
Oh, I mean, if it happens, it happens. I'm not going to predict what Barnaby's going to do. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we'll see what happens if he does it. Yeah.
Would that be part of a reform process in your eyes? That you know, the changing of the guard.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look. I don't know. I don't like predicting where that could go. If he does it, he does it. Um, it'll be interesting to see what the impact that has on the Nationals, because that, the Nationals may very well have split from the Liberals. So the Nats and the One Nation could be running for a seat, because between the two of them, they probably would only get 14%. Like, they'll get one, but I doubt they'll get 28% between the two of them. So it'll be an interesting situation if Barnaby did run for One Nation. But look, I don't want to say too much there, because there's another alternative that no one's even looked at, and it doesn't involve people first, that people are missing as well.
You going to tell us what that is?
No.
Come on, Gerard.
Look, I mean, there's only so many other regional parties out there, so you can join the dots. But
exactly.
if you think about it, but there's. I think there's actually a better alternative, whereby a few parties could merge. And I should add, and I will say this: I've been approached by a lot of people down in the Riverina. There are a lot of disenfranchised farmers down there in southern New South Wales, and northern Victoria, who are looking at building another country party up. Yeah.
Well, we're hearing a lot about reform.
Yeah.
That's on everyone's front of mind at the moment, and especially on the back of Nigel Farage. Do you think that that's a viable option?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, though, if that was to work, you have got to get some existing MPs to join it. And yes, I've had that conversation as well. And the question is, you're looking at one of four, in my view, would be Jacinda, Alex Antic, Matt Canavan, and Andrew Hastie. Now, Matt said publicly he's not leaving the Nats, and I believe it. Matt will quit politics, I think, before he left the Nats. And this is why I think, and it's no secret, Matt knows I think this, that Matt needs to step into the lower house and challenge Littleproud. Like, he needs to basically run for Capricornia, take out Michelle Landry, and then challenge Littleproud after the next election, and take leadership of the Nationals, and then lead the coalition. Now, Matt may not lead the coalition if the coalition drops net zero either. So, but ultimately, and this is the other key point, to succeed, to get a new party to succeed, I do think you need a couple of those existing coalition members, high-profile coalition members, to jump ship. I'm not sure they will. They might. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I certainly can't do it. I don't have the profile to do it anymore.
I think ultimately you need all three of them, really.
The more the merrier, the more the better, for sure. I think Pauline, she's on 15% at the moment, and who knows, the way they're going, she could end up on 30 if the Liberals keep collapsing. But yet again, no, Pauline will be at 74 at the next election, asking for another 6 years. While she may get the Senate seat up here in Queensland, I don't know that people nationally would vote for a One Nation setup if there wasn't a clear leadership transition, as well, and not to the daughter either, right? Because yet again, the nepotism that's going on there in picking your own daughter to lead the party is not the sort of stuff that, if any other politician did it, they'd be crucified. Now, I know the base of One Nation would think it's great, but the problem with the base of One Nation is they're only 5 to 10% of the population, right? So if you want to get to 50%, you've got to, this is why I keep talking about corporate governance and quality assurance. You've got to dot your I's and cross your T's on all this stuff, so that, you're a smaller target on that stuff.
Agree,
yeah.
Gerard, getting back to the state of the nation and how we can fix a lot of things, we have no industry in this country anymore. We've lost a lot, virtually. I mean, it's all outsourced to China. Do you think that the Australian economy could support an automobile industry, a car industry again? Could we resurrect Holden, for example?
The answer is yes. And a couple of ways you do that is because this is the thing now that people don't realise. A lot of manufacturing is now automated. So the old argument that our wages were too high compared to Asia, while it probably is true to a degree, if we can automate a lot of that stuff, we would be able to become competitive. Now, while automation mightn't necessarily create the jobs, what it would do is actually create wealth because we value add here in this country, right? So don't necessarily think that automation is bad because the jobs won't be created. You've got to look at it through the lens of, well, if we're not importing, I'm not sure how many, we buy 20 million cars a year, so times that by 10,000 would be least, 20 billion, maybe $200 billion worth of cars each year. That could be wrong, but, it's a lot, multi-billion dollars worth of car imports. If we can add the value here, that's where we start to keep our wealth in our country. So how do we do that? Basically, we abolish payroll tax. The federal government would have to lean on the state governments to abolish payroll tax. That's entirely doable, and we can fund that by bringing back stamp duty on share trading. It's completely wrong that you have to pay stamp duty on a real house or a real business or a farm. A hard asset, so to speak. You don't have to pay stamp duty on paper assets like shares, especially when 50 to 60% of the stock market is traded by foreign algorithms. We can build a whole heap of new coal-powered fire stations or uranium-powered fire stations, whatever. So we produce cheap energy again. And the third part of it would be to basically streamline our industrial relations practices without, impacting minimum wages. There's so many different rules and regulations in this country that if we streamline the laws around our IR system, just the entire stupidity of having 6 state governments in this country, plus a federal government, plus local councils. If we could streamline a lot of that stuff, I believe we could become more competitive. Notwithstanding, and the other policy we've got at People First is we would actually start the process rebuilding manufacturing by bringing back the military apprenticeship scheme. That was abolished in the early 90s. I've spoken to many people who did their trade apprenticeship through the military apprenticeship scheme. We are going to also look to fund an increase, obviously the military apprenticeship scheme, but also military engineering corps, by the civil engineering corps that will build roads, ports and railways, and then a electrical mechanical engineering corps that will build power stations and even, God forbid, a manufacturing industry whereby we started manufacturing our own military equipment and even government vehicles, whereby we just got every government in Australia to buy Australian-made cars. That in itself would produce an economy of scale. And we could then sell into New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, so we can do it. And of course, the other policy to make it more competitive, and this is what annoyed me when we shut down the car industries here in Australia, no one ever asked the question, how much in interest, royalties and rent did we pay offshore, right? And I can tell you exactly how much it was that we paid off. Yeah, when I say how much, what I meant by that was, I'll repeat that. No one ever asked the question, how much in interest, royalties and rent did General Motors or Toyota or Datsun pay offshore to their subsidiaries, their subsidiaries offshore or their head office offshore? And I can tell you how much it was. It was enough to make sure they never made a profit here in Australia, because if they made a profit here in Australia, they'd pay 30 cents company tax, or back then, back in the 80s, the company tax rate was up in the 40s. So they basically shifted all their profits offshore by what you call above the line transactions, so interest, royalties and rent. And that's where my expertise comes into play, because I can just tear apart a balance sheet and financial statements very quickly. And of course, most people can't do that. And it's not just in regards to the automotive industry. Just last week, I did a post on AGL where AGL explicitly state the cost of gas was $115 a megawatt and the cost of coal is $22 a megawatt. And they also say that they're going to have to build 12 gigawatts of generation to replace the 4 gigawatts of generation they're shutting down through coal. So in other words, they're implying that renewable energy's only got a 33% capacity, right? So if you're going to have to use gas for the other 66% of the time at $115 an hour or a megawatt hour, You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know, well, you're going to be paying $80 just for the gas component. So all that stuff is in the AGL, and 2GB, I don't know if you saw that 2GB came out and reported it last Friday. That was their producer basically used that information from my post. So, yet again, getting people first to plug here, we know how to read a set of financial statements and know where the rorts are. But yeah, we can bring back a manufacturing industry, and we won't necessarily be able to compete with Asia. But the important thing is to hear what we've got to recognise. In the 80s, we threw the baby out with the bathwater when John Button lifted those tariffs. And, it sounded all very good in theory, but look at Victoria today. I mean, it was once the powerhouse of this country in terms of manufacturing. And today it's basically the biggest drag on this country's economy because it's now powered by those white-collar grifters chewing up $40 billion in fees on paper shuffling inside of superannuation. Academia, we've got, our children graduating from university at the age of 22, 23, broken brainwashed. And then we've got all these other service industries. And that was the thing. We were told, if we offshore manufacturing, we'll become a high-tech, high-service economy. Well, we never became a high-service economy. We became a low-service economy that didn't actually value add because, academia, and the foreign student rort, and they shift off $8 billion a year in remittances, don't forget. And then just shuffling, the $40 billion in superannuation that's just handed over to financial engineers, none of that's value adding. That's just dividing the pie. But our pie is actually getting smaller and we're dividing it amongst more people because we're not value adding through manufacturing. And, I was just talking to someone today about, our mining industry. A lot of people slag off our mining industry for not paying enough tax. That's not actually true. Our three biggest taxpayers are actually Rio Tinto, BHP and Fortescue. It's true that the offshore gas wells don't pay royalties and that needs to be fixed, and we've got a policy for that. But what we should be making those mining companies do is actually for every 10 tonnes of coal or iron ore they export, they have to keep 1 tonne of coal or iron ore here and actually value add. And, BHP, Blue Scope Steel used to be BHP. What was it? What's the name of the one in South Australia? It was also used to be a part of BHP. I can't think of the name now. At Whyalla, it used to be a part of BHP as well. Those mining companies need to be forced into. I mean, I know we're handing over billions of dollars, or we did, to Andrew Forrest and his Squadron Energy for renewables, and that all went up literally tits up in a matter of months, or maybe about a period of a year or so. These guys ought to be value adding to their iron ore, that, and likewise for the coal. We need to be, we can do that. I mean, you can't tell me that we export this stuff to China, they value add, and then bring it back again. That's completely absurd. We need to do it. Leo Hill. Have you heard of Leo Hilscher? Ever heard of him?
No, I haven't. No.
So he was the treasurer under Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, and he passed away earlier this year. And he's a living, well, he's no longer a living legend, but he's a legend in Queensland because of his foresight when he was the treasurer to Joh, not the elected treasurer as in a politician, but he was head of treasury. But he had the foresight. He opened up the Bowen coal deposits. And he made BHP Mitsubishi actually build a railway line. But when he opened up those coal deposits, we started to generate, the state of Queensland generated royalties, they generated freight charges, and then they generated port charges from the ships as they came in and loaded the ships. But then he went and did it all over again with the bauxite deposits up in North Queensland, except what he did with bauxite was he said to Comalco, so Comalco, for those of you who don't know today, is now part of Rio Tinto, but Comalco stands for Commonwealth Aluminium Company, and it was used to be, the Commonwealth used to own that aluminium. But what Leo Hilscher said to Comalco was, well, you can't export, we're not going to give you a license to export bauxite. So that meant then they had to actually add value to that bauxite before they could export it, which of course gave us that wonderful town in central Queensland today called Gladstone. And we need to start doing, the state premiers need to start saying to the BHPs of the world, if you want to export that coal, you're going to have to turn one every 10 tonnes you export, you're going to have to turn one of it into steel or value add to it. And we should be doing the same for that critical minerals. I mean, that critical minerals deal, I'm just weeping tears of blood with the stupidity of that. That $8 billion worth of critical minerals will end up being turned into $800 billion of high tech value, because those critical minerals go into iPhones, high-tech defense products, you name it, chips, computer chips, all that sort of stuff. And in return for us getting the $8 billion for the critical minerals, we're going to park $1 trillion of our super funds over in the US, where the US fund managers, even if they just, clip 1% of the ticket on that $1 trillion, that's $10 billion a year for nothing more than a bit of paper shuffling. You can't make this stuff up. Australia has to stop giving away its hard assets in exchange for paper assets, right? And this is where, people first, we've got another solution for that. We're going to bring back the military apprenticeship scheme, as I pointed out. We're also going to bring back our infrastructure bank. Now, as many of you know, our children have been brainwashed by climate change today, by the climate change narrative. 40 years ago, and I was a part of this, and I did a commerce degree at UQ, and I worked in finance. We were brainwashed that governments can't print money out of thin air. That's completely and utterly wrong. Governments have an inherent responsibility to control the volume of credit in the system. That's not my opinion. That's the opinion of the 1937 Banking Royal Commission, whose primary finding was the central bank must always control the volume of credit in the system and then pay attention to the distribution of that credit through the private banks. And what I mean by that is, if you know what a balance sheet looks like, you've got an asset on one side and then debt and equity on the other. For too long, the governments have used, and this is Paul Keating, this is when we lifted capital controls in 1985. Paul Keating turned around and said, we're no longer going to actually control the volume of credit in our own country. We're just going to reduce all get rid of all capital controls. And if the private banks want to go offshore and borrow money, they can borrow as much money as they like, and we're not going to stop them from doing it. Now, if Albanese came out tonight and said that we're going to lift all controls around immigration, there'd be pitchforks out the front of Parliament House tomorrow morning, wouldn't there? But yet, 40 years ago, when Keating lifted all controls on how much money we borrowed, no one said a thing. Everyone thought it was great because, just hang on a minute here, I'm just going to change phone, because everyone, basically, the banks went out and borrowed, they had $8 billion in foreign debt in 1985. By 2008, they had $800 billion in foreign debt. That was all lent against housing, inflated house prices from 3 to 4 times earnings to 10 to 12 times earnings, sent two parents back to work, drove the birth rate down to 1.5. And then in 2008, when the GFC occurred, basically, in order to save house prices from crashing, Kevin Rudd let foreign students start buying housing, hence the creation of the foreign student boom and the immigration boom. So yet again, the way we've got to fix this stuff around is by introducing an infrastructure bank. Now, what that does, getting back to controlling the volume of credit, instead of using debt, we're going to use equity. And this is the big thing. If I say to most people today, if I ask them the question, should governments print money out of thin air, they'll go, oh, no, you can't trust governments with that. But if I turned around and said, well, should BHP issue new shares to build a new coal mine? People would go, yeah, that's fine. They do it all the time. What's wrong with that? Well, the question is that governments should be able to issue new infrastructure bonds on the condition that they do it to build bridges, tunnels, dams, power stations, ports, airports, and telecommunication assets that actually generate recurring revenue. So it's just like, if you go and get a house loan for your house, the bank won't lend you $1 million unless you put your house up as a mortgage, right? Or a farm or whatever. It's called secured lending. It's pretty basic. What the government needs to start doing is we need our own infrastructure bank in Canberra. So instead of allowing state governments to borrow money offshore, they go to Canberra to borrow money. Now, why does that matter? Because if a state government builds a dam today for $1 billion and they go and borrow that money offshore, means the first $1 billion they make from that dam, they've got to repay offshore. Another 25 years, say it takes 25 years to repay that loan at, say, 4% interest, that's another 100%, 25 by 4 is 100%. That's another 100% interest that they've got to repay offshore. So we are by allowing the foreign banks to lend money to our own governments, we are paying these foreign banks interest to use our own currency, right? So that stupidity has got to stop, right? If the private companies issue their own shares against assets, we should get the federal government to issue infrastructure bonds against two state governments against their assets or the assets they're going to build. And this is the way we solve the country's problem. This is how we fix our structural imbalances up, because we've got to start building again. Because we've stopped building 40 years ago, around the 80s, and I'll touch on this again in a minute because of the Franklin Dam decision, but we've stopped building. And what we've done is instead of building, we've started borrowing, and we've started borrowing foreign debt. So our asset base has shrunk because another disastrous result of those capital controls was that savings banks were no longer regulated. So instead of just say taking people's savings and then lending that against housing, they were allowed to lend it against anything. So what happened in the late 80s was the Victorian State Bank went and bought an investment bank called Tricontinental. It sent the Victorian State Bank broke. It nearly sent Victoria broke, that and Pyramid Building Society.
Yeah, I remember that.
And the Commonwealth Bank had to buy out the Victorian State Bank. And then they used the fact that the Victorian State Bank collapsed because Keating no longer regulated, and said, what's savings banks? And this is where people don't understand. Different banks have different purposes, right? A savings bank is just a very traditional vanilla. People put their deposits in the savings bank, or they put in a term deposit. That money is then lent out to other people for housing. Now, that's a virtuous cycle. So before 1985, so I'll give you an example. When I worked at the Bank of Queensland, for every $1 million we lent, 60% of that money came from offshore. So only 40% of it came from domestic savings. Now, had that Keating not relaxed capital controls, the bank would have only been able to lend $400,000, right? And what that would have done was it would have tied the price of housing to earnings, right? Because when they lifted capital controls, house prices were no longer tied to earnings. And what it means is that 60% of the money we now pay in interest goes offshore again, right? So we are just bleeding money to use our own currency, right? Now, the traditional cycle of a savings bank was virtuous because what you'd have is the older generation retire, they put their money in the bank, they get 3 or 4% in a term deposit. The bank then turns around and lends that to the younger generation. The younger generation pays the interest back to the bank that then pays that interest to the older generation. So what we were doing was that, by keeping that money internal, we were, older people were helping, receiving interest to help them, fund their retirement. And the older people were funding the younger people to buy houses, but only houses were tied to the prior generation's earnings. So we never lived beyond our means. When Keating dropped those capital controls in 1985, we started living beyond our means. And in order to pay for it, we've had to privatise all our infrastructure, and then we've taken on more and more debt. And now that we've sold all our infrastructure, we now have to have a high immigration rate to keep the Ponzi scheme up. So yet again, I'm going to have a crack here at One Nation. And Pauline, everyone says, "Oh, Pauline's been right for 30 years. She's been calling it out." We didn't have a problem with immigration in 1996. Immigration was less than 100,000 in 1996, and the two biggest sources of immigration were New Zealanders and English. Right? We started to get the problem with immigration later on, about a decade later, as a result of the GFC, and when Kevin Rudd started using foreign students to buy houses. Right? Because our own younger people, younger generation couldn't afford houses because we'd allow house prices to inflate, right? So yet again, when we're talking about immigration, we need to talk about it through an economic lens and not a racial lens, right? Because if we go to race, we lose the argument straight away. We've got to adopt this approach whereby we talk about everything through the economy in the eyes of putting more money in people's pockets and making sure that our children have a prosperous future. Now, I draw my inspiration from a bloke by the name of Lachlan Macquarie, because when he first came to Australia, so the first 17 years of the colony, the colony relied on foreign currency, and there was a drought in 1805 in the colony. Sorry, I'm just wobbling around a bit here. Now, after that drought, that foreign currency got repatriated. It was sent offshore. So there was no currency left in the colony, so they started bartering rum. And of course, that literally went tits up with the Rum Rebellion. So Lachlan Macquarie was the first governor to come here after that. And he was the first governor to see Australia as a country, not a colony. And he knew you had to have three things to run a country: a law and order, a military to provide law and order, defend the borders, provide law and order, a taxation system, and a monetary system. So Lachlan Macquarie introduced the holy dollar. You would have heard of that you would have heard of the holy dollar, I suspect.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. That was used to fund pretty much those sandstone buildings you see on Macquarie Street today: Sydney Hospital, Sydney Barracks. Okay. And that's really, really important. Now, the sad thing is, who uses the holy dollar today as its logo? Do you know?
No.
Macquarie Bank. And their business model when they kicked off was that they basically were acting as the merchant banker that privatised all our infrastructure in the 90s to pay off the debt that Keating let come into the country. Right. So Lachlan Macquarie would be rolling in his grave if he knew that basically the holy dollar was being used as its used as the logo to privatise infrastructure, because Lachlan Macquarie was the first governor in this country to start building infrastructure, and he was the first one to start using our own country to use our infrastructure. Now, do you know why he stuck a hole in it, that dollar?
No.
Because basically it was the Spanish bloom, which was the reserve currency of the day. So the holy dollar, so when Lachlan Macquarie got that dollar, he punched a hole in it to stop the currency from being shipped offshore, because he didn't want Australia to lose its own currency like it did in 1805. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So that's, and the sad thing, and you know what the first generation of Australian-born Australians called themselves? Many of them were born in that rum rebellion. You know what they called themselves? Currency lads and currency lasses, because they knew that currency was what saved the colony. Okay, because currency is equity, right? And the sad thing about that story is that the first generation of Australian-born Australians know more about monetary policy than what we do today, because monetary policy, of course, is now being controlled by an independent, double-speak for lack of accountability, RBA. We're not allowed to discuss it. Well, we can discuss it, but basically politicians have washed their hands of talking about monetary policy. Now, monetary policy in the 19th century in the USA was basically like talking about monetary policy in a debate over whether or not you should have a private or public central bank. It was the climate wars, climate change wars of the 19th century. And, this is one of the things we're going to do at People First, is we're going to drop the culture wars and we're going to bring back the class wars, because the culture wars are distracting people from the real issue, which is the poverty that, climate change, COVID, the manipulation by foreign central banks over our currency, which has all been driven by the war on terror. I just did a post on that tonight. It's Remembrance Day, so at least we forget. But the sad fact is, World War One was a bankers' war designed to shift the wealth of Germany or the wealth of Europe from Europe to the USA via Rothschild's subsidiary in the US, JP Morgan. I'm sure many of your listeners would know JP Morgan funded both sides of the war in World War One. Particularly, initially they funded the British and the French, and they were losing. Hence why they had to sink the Lusitania to get the Americans into the war, because they needed the Americans to come in and bail out JP Morgan, because the British and the French were losing the war. As you know, we lost Gallipoli. So, these things most people don't understand. And ironically enough, in World War Two, even though Britain was on the winning side, it was Britain who had to repay the war debts to the US. And the reason for that was France got stripped clean of its wealth after Napoleon got flogged in 1815. So a lot of that wealth ended up going to the Prussians, because Prussians fought with the British. So the Prussians and the British controlled most of the wealth after that throughout the 19th century. And then the Germans were flushed of their wealth in World War One, and then the British were made, even though they were on a winning side, they had to repay their debts in World War Two. So they had to repay the British, and it took repay the Americans, and it took them 60 years. They didn't repay that debt till 2004. But interestingly enough, in the Suez Canal crisis, when Britain and France and Israel tried to take the Suez Canal back from Egypt, Eisenhower threatened to dump the sterling bonds that they held, which was the debt that the British held, if they didn't get out. So that's why Anthony Eden had to resign, because Eisenhower was on of the deep state. He was actually one of the first presidents on of the deep state. Monetary policy is fascinating. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, look, I'm sure, Gerard, that COVID was a distraction, but I mean, you would have put those very arguments to treasurers, to people in your party. I mean, did they just ignore what you had to say?
Yeah, so I had a meeting. Actually, it's ironic, because when the COVID was on, we had a few weekends where we had to stay down in Canberra because we weren't allowed back in Queensland. And I was the secretary of the finance backbench for the coalition for 5 years. So throughout that COVID period, I actually organised finance backbench meetings on weekends, and not everyone came, of course, where I went through and explained all this to my colleagues on the finance backbench committee. I also explained it to Josh. I actually explained it to Morrison when he was treasurer before I became. I actually flew down on my own coin one sitting week to see Morrison and I got half an hour with him. Didn't get anywhere with him. Josh gave me a bit more time. Didn't get anywhere with Josh, but he did give me 2 hours. I did get 2 hours with Stephen Kennedy, who was the then treasurer, not treasurer, but head of treasury, sorry. And his words after that were about the need to build infrastructure. His words to me was, well, we don't want the Japanification of Australia. And I couldn't believe what I was hearing, because what he meant by that was he didn't want to be like Japan, where we had too much infrastructure. And I was like, mate, I'd rather, and Japan's been a little bit caught out because their population's decreasing, as, typical of many Western countries, the birth rate's declining. But we've still got, obviously we've still got immigration and we've still been growing. I mean, we need to be building more infrastructure. And yet again, you want to draw inspiration from great Australians. I mean, and it is World War One, Remembrance Day today. Let's not forget our greatest general, John Monash, who pretty much, he was the only first general to be knighted on the field in 200 years as a field. Was it knighted on the field, or he got an award? He was the first general in 200 years by King George V, because he was such a brilliant tactician. But legend has it that Monash never fired a bullet in battle. His brilliance was the fact that he was a builder and he was as a strategist. And that's what we also offer that at People First, is that we have over the horizon vision. And we know that we can, if we plant a seed today, it'll be a tree tomorrow. And that's why we want to go back to building infrastructure.
Well, infrastructure and doing things ourselves. I mean, look at the military. I mean, how many times did you hear, Gerard, young kids that were waiting 2 years to get into the military? I mean, the military doesn't even employ its own people. They out-farm it to a deco who sit on their hands. I mean, it's an absolute disgrace.
Yeah, and I got an email today from a lady whose son still can't get in the military because they want him to take a COVID jab. And they're testing for COVID. And she said she doesn't know why they're still testing for COVID in the military. That was literally today. But yet again, military apprenticeship scheme will use our own labour. Infrastructure bank will use their own capital, because it's wealth for toil. And at the end of the day, this is where I say I want to stand up for Australians who stand up for themselves. If you get out of bed and put your nose to the grindstone, that's where People First want to be there for you. And ultimately, we don't believe in free markets, neither do Robert Menzies. But what we do believe in capitalism, and the true capitalists are those people who risk their own capital, and it's not necessarily financial capital. You can be a carpenter or a bricklayer who's risking their own hands, building a house. You can be a scientist or engineer risking their brains, putting their, using their intellectual property. You can be a nurse or a teacher using their heart and their passion to teach children and look after our elderly. All that is capital, like it's human capital. And there's a false dichotomy between capital and labour, and that's got to stop. The real division is between the top end of town and the big end of town. And we want to, we don't care whether you're blue collar Labor or National Party farmer or small business Liberal. We want to be there for all the individuals that just, whatever they're doing, if they're getting out of bed and putting their nose to the grindstone, that's where we want to, look after them. And we know that, the wealth, and this is the thing, right, where we have to understand, going back to that money printing, they say, oh, you can't print money out of thin air. But what we're doing by setting up an infrastructure bank is we're actually going to create wealth out of thin air. If we can go and build a dam, and then that dam can irrigate a paddock, and then you go and put a bull in and 20 cows in that paddock, and you come back in a year's time, you'll have 20 calf paddock, right? Those 20 calves are Mother Nature giving you the wealth through the rain and the sunlight and the soil. And all we've got to do is start tapping and controlling that wealth that comes out of the sky every year, instead of selling those assets to foreigners who are just shifting those profits offshore. And we'll do the Lachlan Macquarie. We're going to punch a hole in the dollar again by lifting withholding tax rates above domestic company tax rates, so that if anyone wants to shift the profits they make here in this country offshore, we're going to tax them more than keeping it here.
Gerard, the man on the land's been copping it a fair bit lately, and it's not looking very brilliant for him. I'm sure you're getting a fair bit of support from country folk on the land. What would you say to them to reassure them that these policies that you're talking about would be assisting them in the future?
Oh, well, I mean, this is where the infrastructure bank, for example, will be of great benefit to the regions, because we'll get back into dam building, and we will tackle. We're going to we want to reverse the Franklin Dam decision. Forget the Lima decision and all that. That wasn't binding. The binding decision was that Tasmanian's dam decision in 1983, where Bob Hawke took the Tasmanian government to the High Court and basically said that if the federal government signs a foreign treaty, it can override the powers of the state government. And Lionel Murphy, I think, was on the High Court at the time, but the High Court agreed with Hawke. And as a result of that, we've barely had any infrastructure, what I call productive infrastructure, built in this country since then. Because what happens is those state environmental defender officers will go to the federal government every time to the environment. And we saw this a couple of years ago in Orange, whereby they've used the cultural heritage laws to override, the building of a gold mine there. Despite the fact that the gold mine, the people that wanted to build the gold mine paid $180 million in regulate, environmental, to get the permission from the New South Wales government. We've got to overturn that decision as well. But going back to the man on the land, what we'll do is if we build more dams and more power stations, we can get more irrigation out there. And if we can build better roads, and for example, military apprenticeship scheme, the first thing the Civil Engineering Corps is going to do is start extending that duplication of the highway from Gympie all the way to Rockhampton. We need to improve our internal regional roads, and we can do that if we have a military engineering corps, so that we can get produce to markets faster. We can have more dams. We can have lower cost of energy. We can have more ports for shipping, and also if we have more cheaper energy, we can value add to our livestock here as well.
Where do we sign?
Well, mate, just all you got to do is www.peoplefirstparty.au. Hop on, join. It's $50 a year, and be part of the movement. As I say to a lot of people, even if you don't have the time to be active in the party, even if you're inactive and just contributing $50 a year, it all adds up. We don't have any big donors backing us or anything like that. And we don't, I wouldn't say, I'll never say no to, if someone did want to give us a donation, a big donation. But ultimately, if, as I said, back in the August the 31st, when I had that March for Australia, something like 200,000 people marched, or, give or take 10,000 people. If all 200,000 people joined one party, paid $50 a year, that'd be $10 million we could raise in a year. And instead of going marching, they went and handed out 50 flyers with our 5 key policies. That's 10 million households you could deliver, our 5 key policies with a QR code on the back and a contact email address. We can get our message out there. So we don't need the mainstream media. Well, it would help, but given that we're not going to get the mainstream media, this is where the power of grassroots activism really kicks in. 200,000 people in one movement being properly coordinated, and that's what People First will do, because up until now we haven't, One Nation hasn't had branches up until now. They've started branches because we did. They wouldn't use their grassroots members to do anything other than sit there on Facebook and complain. And that's Facebook, does serve a purpose, but we can't continue to sit on social media and complain about the problem. We've got to get out there and actually, fight back. And a lot of people are pessimistic, and I say, well, don't be, because you imagine what it was like 200 years ago when our pioneering forefathers went out into the scrub, living in some, shanty hut or something like that. They would have been struggling against fires, floods, and droughts. They would have lost their wealth numerous times, but they got up and they kept rebuilding. And that's what we've got to do. We've got to rebuild the political system in this country, channeling all that frustration, and instead of sort of, turning to some of these parties out of desperation, I say to you, join People First, because we'll offer inspiration, we'll offer direction, and we'll offer vision that will provide our children with a better future.
Sounds awesome. You've relied a lot on grassroots support in your tour and also in your election campaigning. A lot of the Hoodies Heroes people have been heavily involved in what you're doing. We spent a couple of weeks with Rob and Shane Southall up at Proserpine, Mackay area, and they're avid and they work so hard making sure that, you get some kind of voice up there. How important are these people in your campaigning?
Oh, absolutely. They're extremely important, because, you can't do it all. We can't do it. I've never believed in a top-down approach. It's just against my, DNA. But we need people on the ground. If we want to form government across 150 electorates, every electorate, anyone that's done any campaigning knows that every electorate is a little, you need a proper machine within that electorate. You can't run it from just one head office across the state or across the country. And that's where, One Nation have fallen down. I mean, yeah, they get 5 or 6% of the vote, but you're dreaming, you're never going to get off the crossbench with 5 or 6% of the vote. And I don't want to go back to Parliament, Canberra, sitting on the crossbench complaining about it. I want to be implementing these solutions that we just mentioned. So you need to have, this is where the importance of an active grassroots membership matters, because you need key people in every electorate out there organising your local branch, getting them ready, getting out there on the markets as often as they can, ideally every weekend, but we accept, as in volunteer organisations, that people don't always have the time to do that. But we want them, letterbox dropping, going, setting up, stands at the shows, things like that, where they can start to engage on a face-to-face level with the community and talk about, step one, listen to their concerns, and step two, try and hopefully we'll have a solution for their concerns and some vision, and start instilling a sense of optimism back into the country, because we desperately need a vision, and that's what People First offers. And with that vision, then gives people hope, and it inspires them to get moving, get energetic, and get out there and take their country back.
It's a pretty impressive argument, Gerard. Johnny.
Well, I think Gerard summed it up before when he used the words wealth for toil, straight from our national anthem, if it hasn't already been struck out by the woke. But it just about sums it up, doesn't it? It's where we need to be. Gerard's talking some very simple solutions, but, very effective ones. But I suppose that's where we need to get everyone on the same page and moving forward as one entity, so that we can impact Canberra and achieve some of these outcomes for the good of Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely, John. And it's it's going to take not just the miners but the nationals, and it's going to take coordinated effort, whereby ultimately we need to see a Robert Menzies like figure, 1944, for those who aren't familiar. Because what the Liberal Party, before it was formed in 1944, there were three major parties in 1901, and the first party was obviously the Protectionist Party, and you had the Free Traders and then Labor. And then when in 1905, the Free Traders and the Protectionist Party had to merge into the Fusion Party. That Fusion Party then became the Nationalist Party. So, and that was the party, by the way, that Robert Menzies joined. He didn't join the Liberal Party. He actually joined the Nationalist Party. That then collapsed and became the UAP under Joseph Lyons in the 1930s. Labor formed power throughout the war. And then Menzies brought together about 16 minor parties in 1944. And then the Liberals got into power, I think 49, was it? Maybe 51. I'll stand to be corrected on that. And ironically enough, Menzies ended up voting for the DLP at the end of his life because he was so disenfranchised with the Liberal Party and the direction they'd taken. There's plenty of people that have left the Liberal Party, including its own founder. Well, I don't know if he left the party, but he didn't vote for it in a couple of elections. He voted for the DLP. So we need a sort of, a moment whereby everyone, we need to get everyone working together. But to be honest, it's more than just the miners. It's something needs to give the Nationals and a coalition as well.
Realistically, how many candidates are you hoping to field at the next election, do you think?
The next federal election? Well, it costs you $2,000 just to nominate a candidate, so we need $300,000 to put a candidate in every seat. I don't think we will run a candidate in every seat. Where we will run candidates is where we have a strong grassroots movement. What we won't be doing, however, is putting candidates in at the last minute, chewing up the vote of other people. So, or other parties. It's very, very important that you're going to run a candidate to build your brand, not to necessarily get your money, to pick up taxpayers' money so you can keep paying yourself a job. We've got to do this properly. But we certainly will be running close to 30 candidates here in Queensland, where this is our strongest state. We won't run against the Catters in North Queensland. And then, certainly in the Northern Rivers in northern New South Wales, we're very strong there. We're very strong down in Riverina. We're very strong in Newcastle. We're also strong in certain areas of Victoria. and then I'm off to Perth this weekend. So we'll look at where we're strong in Perth as well, and Western Australia as well. But because so I'm quite transparent about our funds. We're up to about $500,000, which is compared to what the majors have got. They've got probably 100 million in assets each. So we'll be lucky to have $1 million. We're aiming to have $1 million to spend by 2028, which across 150 electorates isn't a lot, because it costs you 2,000 just to nominate, 3,000 for core flutes, 3,000 for how to vote cards. So you're looking at about $10,000 just as a bare minimum to run in any electorate, just to do the bare basics before advertising or any significant billboard advertising. So yeah, we hope to have a lot. We'll certainly try and run Senate candidates in every state, because that's the advantage of, well, it's not an advantage, but at least in the Senate, you only need 14% of the vote. And I've sort of am reasonably well known across the country, so we can probably get 2 or 3% to start off with, which will help us get it to that 14%. But we've got a lot of work to do, between now and then.
Well, I believe you're up in Mackay, I think 12th of December, is that right?
Yeah, so I fly to Cairns on the 5th of December. So Townsville's the 6th, Mackay's the 7th. So I'll be in so I think it's the Sunday the 7th I'll be in Mackay. Yeah.
Okay, well, I know a couple of people are going to be there for sure, and
Oh, good.
we're just more power to you, Gerard. It's been a real education tonight. It's been a history lesson, but it's been a lesson in economics, and it's been a lesson in common sense. And I mean that is so lacking. We're looking at all this digital ID stuff. That's the last question I think we should put to you: is where you stand on the government's moves on digital ID at the moment.
Well, I voted against it last year, Graham.
Yeah.
And, it's a clumsy attempt. It was sold as helping to protect our children. Yet again, it's government overreach. Parents have to look after their own children. If you're worried about your children's use of technology, and I've got 3 children under 14, you take the phones off them. It might involve a bit of, toing and froing with your children, but get them out. I'll be up at 4:30 in the morning taking my middle son to swimming. My other son's in robotics. My daughter goes swimming. She's in drama. You got to keep them active. To keep them off the iPads. Then they've got their own chickens now. They've got to look after. So we try to keep them grounded as much as possible. But it's our role as parents to do that. And can I say, there's plenty of like our big shout out to Ferny Hill Swimming Club. They use Facebook to give notifications on events and things like that. And I know many other sporting organisations, many other community organisations use social media to get their message out there. So why they're making it hard to, for the community to use social media and engage it's just a stupid, typical government control, overreach into people's lives. I mean, there's obviously all the aspects of foreign technology companies having access to our data. But yeah, look, long story short, against it. Yeah.
Well, John, I think we'll go to a break. We'll say goodbye to Gerard. We'll go to a break and come back. But it's been a really enlightening interview, Gerard. You've certainly opened my eyes. And, when you answered the question about the automotive industry the way you did, I mean, to me, that's a healthy sign of a good, healthy economy, is a functioning automotive industry, because there's so much manufacturing that supports that. The infrastructure bank, everything you're talking about just makes standout common sense. It makes Blackout Bowen look like a twit, which isn't very hard, but that is what it is. So, Johnny, any final questions or comments?
Well, no, just to say, look, I think Gerard's demonstrated tonight why he's such a loss to the Australian Parliament and Australian people, and hopefully that loss can blossom into something that's prosperous for all of Australia. Because I think whether you're the functional head of that moving forward, or just the brains behind it, Gerard, I mean, you certainly will play a part in it somewhere. I'm certain of that, to get this country back on track. If only those bureaucrats in the health departments and other places had have actually engaged with you instead of fighting back and being so disingenuous towards you. I think we would have been in a lot better place in this country, but they weren't. They were completely corrupted, and you were better for it. And Laura, I just want to thank you for your service and for what you did. I mean, you were such a beacon of hope to so many during a very dark period, and I know that from the correspondence and from the well wishes that you get from people, but even for us, like people look to us as well, and I mean, it was just so wonderful to see you smashing back at these people and hitting them for six. It lifted us, didn't it, Hoodie?
It sure did. It sure did. And I mean, we know you spoke to an empty chamber a lot of the time, but that message resonated with so many people, and it gave me a lot of encouragement. So I'm honestly telling you, Gerard, I'm going to be visiting your website. I'm going to join.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Well, look, I mean, I don't miss going to Parliament because ultimately it's more important to build a machine to beat the machine. And that's what we're focused on, to people first, because, that's what it's going to take. And it's going to take, a lot of cooperation and coordination, but it's also going to take a lot of discipline. In that way we go about things, we have to dot our I's, cross our T's, and be completely transparent and maintain our integrity. And that means, like no one in our party, I'm not taking a salary out of the party. I'm doing this pro bono. I've had other people that, have offered their services, and I said, you either do it for free, you're not doing it at all, because everyone contributes, and we're all, it's a very flat structure, and that's the way it has to be, because I've seen other political parties, and there's quite a few of them whereby a few key people are pulling money out of it for their own benefit, and that's not in benefit. That's not in the best interests of the people. I was quite shocked. I caught up with a good friend of mine. It's not One Nation, just, I'm not trying to cast shadows on them, but I was surprised at how much money was squandered in that party, and that could have been something that would have been the party to go with, on consultants. And I just rolled my head and thought, oh, geez, I can't believe it. So yeah, it's going to take some sacrifice, and we owe it. We owe it to our children to do this. Because we have squandered the wealth that our forefathers gave us by privatising our infrastructure and taking on this foreign debt. And I'm determined, while I'm still breathing, to turn that around.
Yeah, well, it sounds good to me. We'll let you go, Gerard. John and I will come back after the break, but it's been an absolutely fascinating interview, mate, and more power to you.
Yeah, and thanks for your support as always, Graham and John. It's always great talking to you as well.
Yeah, good on you, mate. And we'll catch up with you soon. As I said, I'm going to go and visit your website tomorrow and make a decision then. So fantastic, buddy. Well done.
Okay, cheers. Thanks, guys.
All
Have a
the
great
best.
night. Okay, bye.
And John and I'll be right back straight after the break. Wow.
Doesn't get much better than that, Hoodie, does it?
That was a history lesson. It was a lesson in common sense. And it was a lesson in integrity. I think we all need to join a political party. There's no doubt about that. And I think I've just made my decision. I'll be running, not running. I'll be joining. I'll be joining People First. I just think they're standing for everything that I believe in. There's some good people out there. We spoke to Ruddock today, John Ruddock, and he's all for no government or very little government, and there's a lot to be said for that too. But I tell you what, we've got to do something to get out of this mess. We can't leave it to the likes of Blackout Bowen and Penny Wong. Really, mate, can we?
No, well, I think Gerard hit the nail on the head, and I think he just sees, this is a vehicle to something, that's all encompassing. So, I mean, whether you join his outfit, or you join One Nation, or you join the Libertarian Party, or another minor party, I don't think it really matters. I just think you need to get involved. And I think at some point there needs to be a reckoning of everyone in the same building, and just don't come out until everyone's on the same page, and agree on half a dozen really good policies that everyone can move on with, and go to the election, as a united force. I mean, it sounds very simple, and it should be. And I think we're a step closer to it, Hoodie. I mean, I think Gerard was not only very honest in his appraisal of where we are, but I think he doesn't see People's First Party being, the end result. I think he sees it as the vehicle to getting there. And I think that's very important. And I thought given that there's been some cracks in the relationship with One Nation, I thought he was, pretty fair towards them tonight as well. I don't think that that relationship is beyond repair, and I think Gerard would put the country ultimately first. He's done that on every other occasion, so I wouldn't see why he wouldn't do that in the longer term. So, I just see that as a real positive here, because there's some good people in One Nation too, as we know. I mean,
Oh, yeah, there sure is. There sure is, mate. Look, what I like about everything he articulated tonight is if he's running in the political sphere and his party's up and running based on those policies, that's going to generate conversations that this country needs to have. All those issues he talked about based on the history, the knowledge, the experience, that's going to lead to conversations in the public square that this nation needs to have. And I'm fully supportive of it. I think everything he said resonated with me. Absolutely everything, without reservation. And
The
I think
economy's
most,
the key to everything, Hoodie, isn't it? The economy's it. I mean, what
yeah,
he's essentially saying is we want to restore a fair go for everyone.
yep,
That's all he's saying.
yeah. And wealth for toil, as you highlighted, John, wealth for toil. You just you can't argue with that. Although a lot of people in this day and age would do because they rely on government for everything. But we didn't get to the nation we were before we squandered it by relying on the government for everything. The government relied on us for everything, and we've got to turn the tables. I think it was an outstanding interview. I'm super impressed. I normally keep my political allegiances pretty close to my chest, but I think I've made a decision tonight, and that doesn't change anything in who we interview and whatever, because we're going to give everybody a fair go. And I know you're a libertarian, and we share a lot of similar ideals. And I know that you, in particular, want to see Australian manufacturing come to the fore again, and Australian industry rise out of the ashes. We've got some mates in that game. We talked to Luke Sutton from Drifter Camping and Four Wheel Drive, and people like that, who, he strived for the last 4 years to create opportunities to give Aussies jobs who couldn't get jobs because of the mandates. And he got hammered for that. He got slandered. He got taxed to oblivion. He's been driven under because he tried to do the best to give Aussies a fair crack of the whip. And
Smashed
so
up.
he
Smashed
got
up.
smashed up, and he's
Yep.
fighting for survival at the moment. And he sells a great product. I mean, if we can't look after people like that, we've got no hope in this country, Johnny.
Well, I shared a post yesterday. He's back from overseas, and he's got a new tent. And I tell you, everyone should go and have a look at this tent. It's a cracker. I think he said to me it was a game changer, and I think it is. I think it's an absolute ripper. Go and look at his website and have a look at it. If you've got a ute, a Hilux ute, everyone in Australia's got a Hilux ute, haven't they?
Yeah.
You can put this thing on the back, and I think it's even electric. It goes up. Yeah, it's like an apartment building on the back of your Hilux.
Far out, Johnny. You're painting a pretty big picture.
It
I'll
looks.
go to the website and have a look. Sounds
Go and have
good.
a look.
Although
It's
I'm past camping intense, mate. It's a caravan or nothing for me.
well, I reckon you'd get in this one, Hoodie. I reckon there's a fair chance you'd get in it.
Has it got an elevator?
Should have. It should have an elevator.
It should have an elevator. Anyway, mate, let's say a prayer, eh? Lord Father in heaven, thank you for insight. Thank you for practical common sense, Lord, and thank you for grace and mercy. Lord, we need all of everything we've talked about tonight in abundance, but most of all, we need you, and we need your Holy Spirit to restore this country and its beautiful people. Please be with us, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
You've often been heard to say, old mate,
You just couldn't make this stuff up.
You couldn't make this stuff up. Stay out of the trees, everybody. It's been a big day for us. 3 cracker interviews today and many more to come. Don't draw a line through Club Grubbery yet. We're not going anywhere by long shakes. And we'll be back with you in whenever, but it'll be very soon because the interviews are piling up. We've got some beauties coming in, including one cracker from Canada, which we're arranging at the moment. You're going to be blown away by that one. Anyway, we'll be back with you soon on Club Grubbery. God bless you all. Bye for now.